So just before we start, just want to acknowledge that we are with Wanyamarja people on Madjanji country here in Babinda. Down the road is the beautiful Babinda, the boulders. And just to acknowledge that this country it's a beautiful country, and we want to acknowledge that there's continuing connection between land, water and community, and wanting to pay respects to all our elders, yours and mine. We extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present and listening to our podcasts online. I've been blessed to grow up around the black politics in this country and have been a part of that really strong struggle. So it gives me great pleasure to be here. This is the second podcast in the National Treaty Alliance, Let's Talk Treaty. Right now we're moving over to talk to Suzanne Thompson. Suzanne is the elected co-chair to the Uluru Working Group, which was empowered to implement and promote the Uluru Statement from the Heart and to connect to the grassroots people. Suzanne, I welcome you to this podcast. I'm really looking forward to listening to you, knowing how much experience that you've got in this space.
Thank you. I find it actually quite interesting when we think about the journey, the Uluru Statement Working Group, and I remembered, when I first sort of morphed myself into that space and living where I do out in outback central Western Queensland, and it's usually a region, and I think the central and, some of the more remote regions are forgotten about as part of conversations and how we participate in these national decisions. And, and off I went down to Brisbane. I got a phone call and I thought, I'll go down and check out what this is all about, this, constitutional change thing. And then, of course, then from that space then for Southeast Queensland, then I ended up, being elected then for, the Central and Southeast Queensland to represent our region, then to go to Uluru when we had in 2017, when the Uluru Dialogue then, and bringing everybody together. And then, and when I reflect back, and I think it was quite an interesting time, there was definitely cultural law business that was floating around and you could really feel the energy of it. And it was very disruptive in places and stuff. And I know for myself, that I know in my learnings and growing up, being taught to tune in, to understand doing right business. And, and there was all sorts of stuff that was happening in that space. And, and when I think about then, and there were people and there were, and, I don't think anybody actually knew exactly what was going on, because I think when we facilitate these discussions, and especially for our mob, I think sometimes we tend to come into it too much at a high level, and it can really confuse the space and for us to be really critically thinking about, what's happening in this consultation. And of course, there was a lot of people, people like Lydia Thorpe, and she was leading, what I call the walkout breakaway group, that were about sovereignty, and they were about, treaty and whatnot, and sort of, and thinking then, that I remembered when we arrived at the morning that the Uluru Statement was actually endorsed, and everybody was up early and we went in, and because the energies were so disrupted, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of frustration, all sorts of things. So you could really feel this energy and whisper happening in the big room where the 200 delegates were. And the Uluru Statement then, so there was this upheaval, walkout had happened, all of this stuff, and there was this sense of exhaustion for people too, as if to say, come on, can we just get to the resolve? Can we get to the end? Then the Uluru Statement was read out, and it was such a beautiful piece. It's a beautifully written piece. It really captured us, really captured the essence of it. But there was still something that was missing. And of course, we were all up, yay, this is awesome, and yeah, clapping. And then there was a voice from over in the far corner that said, we should endorse this now. Then everybody goes, yes. And you sort of go, it was endorsed. And I remembered in the Brisbane Dialogue group, and we had very much one of our representatives, Zach Sara, who's a magistrate, and we all sat around and looked at, and he felt, and we trusted him because that's how we think, and that's why we came along. And we trusted him when he said, if we move the words, there's a couple of words, it's a bit too weak, and we could change the language. So it wasn't redesigning, it was just being very specific about some words that could just add a little bit more strength to it instead of a how, a where, or something like that. And so we went to, him and I were asked to go over and to sit down with Megan and with Pat, and to say, hey, can we just change this, a little bit? And we were just told flat out, no, it's too late, it's been endorsed. And I remembered sitting back and thinking, this is really interesting. I don't think I've ever experienced such a facilitated piece of work this way, to not be able to feel that I actually am a part of this statement, really. And then, of course, we went through the process then where we were told we had to elect somebody. And it was just such a busy, high energy flow of stuff happening, and so was it the design? Was it meant to be this design, And next minute I knew, here I was out the front being photographed as part of the 28 members that were elected from all the dialogue regions as the Uluru Statement Working Group, and being given the charge of going out and talking to the people and, in our regions and collectively, and coming up with a strategy, because we were the voice and the duly elected from our dialogue regions that then formed this big national, So when we think about that process, and I was quite proud, to be a part of that. And then I think when I look at it all, and what we really were pushing was that the voice isn't the first thing. And that's what I think was the pushback then from the, the decided leadership group, because it became evident that there was a captain's pick process in this process. And, the more and more you got vocal about your mob, the more and more you got sort of forgotten and silenced. And, and one of the things I remembered asserting myself and saying and reminding the leaders that were funded to go in their representative positions and bodies, and, and I remembered we had a session, and I turned around and I said, the difference between us and you is that the working group members aren't paid to do this. We're voluntary, but you're worried about your superannuation plan and what it is that you're saying. We're not, and that's why our voice has to be heard, because we are supposed to be here for our people and speak their voice. And of course, this is how we want it, and it just kept coming against, no, it's going to be voice for, it's like, no, we're saying, the people are saying it is truth treaty voice, and I'm a great believer that I think truth telling, if we focus on that first, we have to heal as people. And that's one of the things that we collectively said, we have to heal all stories for us. It's not being facilitated in the right way, but also from the grassroots who are living and breathing the reality of the impact every day. We can push ourselves up to be, leaders in the sky, and get good media coverage and earn good money and get very well educated. But I don't think it's actually the voice and the feel of what we know as our reality as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. And the truth has to be told. And we put it into this Western regional structure. That's why I believe ATSIC and all these other models have failed us, because it's conflicting with our whole DNA value system that's just in us, that we know. And, I hope and pray that we spend the time to re-establish that ancient law that we say, we all say, oh, we got our own law, we got our own culture, but what is that? Well, guess what? We actually have permission to be that again. So let's take the time to reassert that cultural knowledge and law. But we have a very small window to get that right, because the generations coming in behind us are so much further removed. So if we don't spend the time to heal us, those young leaders that are coming up, and I've noticed that they've established a youth Uluru Statement Working Group thing, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, but you're empowering them in the wrong way, because you're just empowering them about constitutional Western stuff. We don't have to navigate our way through that. We are told we're the oldest continual culture and governance structure on this planet. Then why are you not respecting that and allowing us to, follow through with it? And I think that's where it comes back to, do I want to be a part of this journey and get caught up in this divide and conquer space of voice? No, I don't trust them. And I really don't trust them. And I don't believe that our people can trust the direction that we're getting taken. And I think we have to focus on healing. Why would we want to come to government for money if we're truly self-determined as a first people of this country and we're trying to assert our position here? Why would we want to do that? Because that's what's controlled us and decided our end game, our destiny, why we've never progressed as a people, is because we're so reliant on the drip feeding and the continual drip feeding, when actually, no, we're self-determined. That's what we're talking about. And I believe that if we were given the opportunity and we were supported the way we were supposed to be supported, because that's what we were told at Uluru, then I believe it'd be a very different situation now. And I believe we would be already moving into truth telling. We've wasted so much time since 2017, where we could have done so much around truth telling, whether it was holding, we thought about having community rallies or just even in local newspapers and just very soft, small step truth telling stuff, and starting to really heal people in their regions, in their areas, because there's actually a bigger world outside of Sydney and Canberra and those places. It's actually the real world. And I think that's what we forget, when we get caught up in these buildings and these offices that just sit there with the lovely aircon and the lovely accommodation and the great meals and the flights and everywhere we get to go, that there's actually more of a real world out there. But the reality of it is that this hasn't changed. And I think even in the territory now, they're even coming back to talking about, I think we've got to take all of these unsafe little children away again. So they did this, took it all away, took all of their resources away, and we're not doing anything about it. Shame on us. Shame on them for not thinking about their own people and the stuff that we are still faced with. This voice thing, heading into that space isn't going to help it. Just wasted resources and wasted our time instead of just getting in. And you want to be a leader, you want to go and start giving back to your communities. Find a community, become a role model for that community. Maybe start putting some of your superannuation in communities and start to support them. Start to really look at it, because I think if we keep coming to government and asking them to, to help fix it, we can fix it ourselves. And one of the things that Vincent has taught us is napachi, napachi. You give, I give back. And so we've said to him, our mob here in Inangai country, you've been given culture and bringing back law for us. Our napachi is our networks of philanthropists and what we've got there, whether they're architects, whatever they are. Our napachi is we're going to work away how we can give back to your community. We don't need government, Uncle, we said. We're going to sit down and figure it out ourselves and resource it ourselves as a people. And I think about when I don't do welcomes, I'll acknowledge, because I'll say to everybody, I can't welcome you. I don't know nothing about you, who you are. We welcome anybody into your home if you don't know who they are, and what we've been forced to because somebody decided. So that's a truth in itself. That's not who we are and what we do. The colonization and that whole story of convicts, and perhaps there was partnerships and relationships and intermarrying and all this sort of stuff, and the truth around that and what that should look like. But with our own people, I think it's even the truth around elders versus old people or aged. We got forced into that space. Truth around who we are and our sense of identity and what country means. Because I think We think that to be Aboriginal, the truth about being an Aboriginal person is to know the flag and to know, to know all of those sorts of things. But actually, it's a little bit beyond that. There's a whole lot more about who we are and what we're about as a people.
We are fortunate to have Joanne Willmot, originally a Queenslander from South Queensland and now living in South Australia, to continue the conversation with us around this subject. And thank you so much for your time.
Okay, my name's Jo Willmot. I'm a Waka Waka woman, and I want to acknowledge the Kaurna people, the people whose country I've lived and worked on since the 70s and had my own children, and it's really important that we acknowledge who the custodians are, who have looked after and cared for country, and all of that lives on top, above and below country, the waterways, the rocks, the mountains, and it's human engagement, and recognising that we're just a part of the ecology, and we have a responsibility in the food chain, as does everything else that exists. And that's what our ancestors left for us as a legacy to take care of. And I'm privileged to be sitting here on Kaurna country and talking to you today. And I think that we're not to forget our history and the collectivism that was a part of the governance across the whole of Australia. You didn't have one leader that led the struggle. You didn't have particular individuals who thought of themselves as the authority in certain aspects that deliberated over lots of people's countries. You had people who had responsibility plus accountability to one another and to country. And I'd like people to remember that as Aboriginal people, that's our cultural framework that maintained us and our ancestors for over hundreds of thousands of years. And that was the legacy they left for us before the violent invasion of the virus that has attacked every aspect of our way of life, plus the waterways, poisoning our food source, our land, our animals, and everything that maintained the balance and harmony that we had a responsibility, duty of care, and an accountability around taking care of. And this whole issue around treaty, what they say is voice, treaty and truth, is a Western construct that delineates our responsibility from one another and to country and to everything that exists. It divides us as people in respect to those who know and those who don't know. When you look across country and see how our country has been divided and what's happened in Aboriginal communities, all of the infrastructure, all of the mechanisms, all of the systems that require thinking through around replicating what was taken from us does not exist. That's why we are living in substandard conditions with substandard services, with an inability to be able to support our communities to thrive and continue the legacy that has been left for us. Treaty is a word that's foreign to our concept, and there are so many people in our community who don't know how to read and write because they've had substandard education. And we talk about comprehending technical and political language that is so foreign to our own that makes people feel inadequate around, do I have a say? Do I have a right to a voice? Do I really understand what's going on? I hear and see people speaking in the media constantly, but I don't understand what they're talking about. I don't know what that really means for me. And we're told to actually trust yet again the government. From the 1967 referendum, when we were asked to trust a system to develop processes to engage our communities, to develop and evolve and become proud and fully functional and thriving communities, once we started to build that capacity, a whole lot of things happened in regards to the dismantling of a whole lot of those services and communities and left them bereft of any resources to be able to continue the work. And so we see today what that means in regards to every one of our communities around this country. It's not our fault as Aboriginal people, the situation we are in today. How do we address all of those basic foundational community networks and life forces in respect to who we are, what we're doing and where we need to go and what we need to get to where we need to go before we even speak about treaty? We've had reconciliation and we're continued hearing about reconciliation and the number of funding that goes into it. Where does that funding go? Into Aboriginal community to build capacity in entities around supporting the right infrastructure and other agencies and resources? Or is it about bringing people together to have conversations around the stolen generation? I am a member of the stolen generation. I'm in the process of going to court with the Queensland government over being placed in a dormitory in an institution because the government doesn't take responsibility for what happened to Aboriginal people. Yet we have the Aboriginal Protection Act. For all of us who've lived under that, we know how powerful, how humiliating and how demeaning that is for us as Aboriginal people. It took away our sovereignty, our right to have control over our lives. If Aboriginal people were paid the right wages and paid for what was stolen from them, their land, we would be in a much better economic, political and social position. And all we're being offered today is a voice, an elected group of people, yet again like at SIC, who will be voted in to give advice to Parliament. Now, if that doesn't work and it's enshrined in the Constitution, how do we unpack that and how do we undo it? And how do we change that so it becomes more meaningful around what I talked about, what happened prior to the virus that invaded this country 230 years ago, that diminished our governance, our way of being, and our collective spirit in taking care of and engaging not just with one another, but all that existed to keep that balance.
Well, thank you for that, Jo. You talked a little bit about the treaty. Is there anything in your past, in your history, that that could lend itself to what's happening now?
When you lived under the Aboriginal Protection Act, you have to have permission from the white superintendent as to where you could go, what you could do, and who you could do it with. And in the missions and reserves, you can look at the records of your predecessors, your parents, your grandparents, and everything is written down there for all to see. There were all sorts of personal documentation and records about what was going on for Aboriginal people that Aboriginal people weren't aware of. The humiliation of being told, no, you can't go and visit your family. It was up to someone else to make that choice. I didn't know that I had two brothers until I was 10 who were in the boys' dormitory and the baby quarters in the mission. I grew up as a single child in the dormitory, and I was there amongst girls who had other sisters with them. So when you're the only child, there's no belonging, there's no connection, and there's a real fear about who do I go to when I'm hurting? Who do I talk to when I want to know something? Is that a possibility? It's that not being able to feel like you were human, which is what the Aboriginal Protection Act was all about. We were not considered human. When non-Aboriginal people make decisions about what's good for Aboriginal people, that's telling us that we don't know what's good for us. I grew up with that. I went to schools where the teacher actually, when we left the mission, told me that a dog was much better than me as an Aboriginal person, and I should go back to the gutter where I came from. I'd walk down the street and white men would yell out and scream, make sexual innuendos, and think that they had a right. There were lots of incidences growing and knowing that you're black. You had to keep your place. You had to shout. You didn't go into certain places because you weren't wanted, and you felt like you were non-existent or invisible. And with a treaty, what is that going to change for me as an Aboriginal person? What's it going to change for my family? When are we going to have reparations for what has been stolen from us? Our land, our connection to our people, our children, our families, the wages that they earn, the number of people who were massacred. There was constant fear. You saw the truck come and pick Aboriginal people up and put them on the back of a truck with chains on their legs and on their hands and being taken to another mission and reserve thousands of miles to foreign countries that people didn't know. And it is because they stood up to the authority and they believed they were human and they had a right to have a say over their life and what their needs were. There's a whole lot of unfinished business before we can talk about, let's sit down, let's wipe the slate clean. Who are we wiping the slate clean for in regards to walking into that space and signing onto a treaty? How many of those people who are endorsing the voice in the context of experience? Because I know when I took the other Aboriginal people who were raised on the mission and moved at the whim of government authorities and put into indentured slave labour, no, when does our voice get heard in that space in regards to having some power and influence and taking back control over our lives in regards to speaking into the truth? We want a treaty, but how will that treaty play out in regards to, are we sitting at the table as equals? When do we become equals? How do we know that we've actually been acknowledged as equal to the colonisers and their absolute power and control over this whole country? What are we signing off to? And because I don't know the fulcrum of what is being asked of us, but after speaking to the Attorney General here yesterday around the voice to Parliament in South Australia, that it is about giving advice to the Parliament. Why do we have national Aboriginal boards and committees that constantly give advice to their state and their Commonwealth counterparts? Why, on top of that, do we need another system that no one's really thought through as to how that's going to work for us? How are they going to collaborate with all the other Aboriginal services that have their national bodies, their local and their state bodies that feed into a national voice? How are they all going to work together? And I think we need to really think about how many Aboriginal people can comprehend and understand what it is that we're talking about when we do talk about. They know what truth-telling is. Non-Aboriginal people are afraid of the truth. My personal experience with doing cultural fitness and cultural awareness for the last 40 years, non-Aboriginal people haven't changed their position around what they think and that they know what is best for Aboriginal people. Some still have racist platitudes about we've gotten ourselves into this position because they've come from all sorts of different backgrounds within their country around being political prisoners and escaping abuse and violence and oppression, coming to this country, and they see this as the lucky country. They don't understand why we, Aboriginal people, shouldn't be grateful and thriving in this country that white people have created for us. And it takes a lot to unpack all of that in the context of they've left their oppressors, but they don't see. We're living with our oppressors, and those oppressors are bringing them all in to be co-opted onto another layer before we get to the people who were the initial oppressors and hold supreme power and control. I don't know how you break that down. And as an Aboriginal person, I've listened to many people and I respect a lot of people who've spoken in this space. If I don't understand it, and I think I'm educated and I know a little bit, then what's happening to the other people in the community? What are happening to the people who are in the criminal justice system, whose children are being taken into care? Mental health, all the suicides we have, children who are being placed in care, men and women who are incarcerated for a whole lot of minor misdemeanours. You know, the situation in our communities where people don't know what to do or how to do anything because they don't have the services and the mechanisms in their community to be able to address a whole lot of problems and issues that have been devised around not building the appropriate infrastructure to support people growing into healthy, thriving communities. We who lived under the Aboriginal Protection Act know exactly what has been taken from us, how we were treated worse than the animals, how our parents were removed from us as lies that were perpetuated against those parents. Remember, the Aboriginal Protection Act, they could take Aboriginal children, not because they were neglected, but we were told that in the mission and in the dormitory that our parents didn't want us. They didn't like us. We got nobody who loved us, and they didn't care. The reason we were there was because those people cared, and that's what they were giving us, an opportunity. Unfinished business, how do you go past that? With babies and children being tormented, tortured, denied any right to their sovereignty and their ability to know who they are and where they come from, and then deny them and diminish them in a way that makes them feel they have no value. Growing in life and always having to confront that racism and that attitude that we as black people don't exist, we shouldn't exist, and it's not our country anyway, we should be removed. And if it wasn't for white people, we wouldn't have the comfortable life that we have. There's a lot more. I mean, it will take years to unpack all of the aspects of what has determined where we are, how we got to be where we are, all of our families who've died before us because they carried the pain, the mothers and fathers who never neglected their children, but because they were useful as workers on pastoral properties, private homes, and looking after other people's children while their children were being neglected in the homes and institutions that were specifically set up with them. All the while, those children being told from the early stages of when they could understand that no one wanted them and they would be neglected. And then as you grew older, all you heard was Aboriginal kids were taken because they were being protected and saved from their parents who neglected them. What more can we talk about in regards to unfinished business? The stolen land. When are we going to be reparated for what's been taken from us? Looking at native title and the number of fights amongst native title groups and families about who's the most Aboriginalist, who's the most traditional custodian, who has more rights than anyone else, when there are whole years of history that has been kept from us in regards to passing down stories, other than when people had the time and the opportunity where they weren't being surveilled and monitored by white authorities to pass on stories. We've all been limited, and it's created this confusion and diminishment. So how do we make non-Aboriginal people accountable for all the damage that they have done? That's the unfinished business.
So the treaty then won't lend itself to that?
Do you know what's in the treaty? Do I know what's in the treaty? Does anyone know what's in the treaty? Who are going to be the authors of the treaty? And how are they going to consult with all of the language groups and the clan groups across this country as to what they believe needs to go into a treaty? No, we're going to do the homogenous, one-size-fits-all, and that's not the way it works. And if Aboriginal people can't work collectively across this country to come to their own resolution about how they need to work in collaboration on what's important for them, then sitting and talking at the table with white fellas who will manipulate and use, it's in their language too. A lot of us know how that language has been used against us, that we need to just be really cautious. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying because of all of the experiences I have, I've got a lot of reason to not trust the process. And how will you make it fair and just for all Aboriginal people?
Mm.
We talk about reconciliation. A lot of Aboriginal people are hurting. A lot of Aboriginal families are disconnected. And there's a lot of history and a lot of pain in those families because of what's happened and what continues to happen. And healing in our community is really important, but sitting on country is more important. But knowing country and being guided by country in respect of being connected and getting your balance instead of being caught up in all the other things that are high expectations and impacts on us from a Western construct. Until we heal one another, particularly individuals and families, I don't know. I have been working with stolen generations and creating healing spaces for them to be taken care of and looked after, and being healed by our medicine people, not by the white doctors, not by the Western medical system. It's a gentle, loving, nurturing, caring and all-embracing process that has given stolen generations the opportunity to feel connected and belonging on country.
Mm.
That's my contribution, Sandra.
Yeah.
But we got to do it with one another, and it just pains me. It's just, I know there are lots of black fellas out there who are really suffering and struggling. I feel for our mob in the prisons, for our kids who are being beaten up, look, we watch on the videos. I get so despondent and distraught at seeing Aboriginal men and women being killed by police and nothing happening. Aboriginal people are considered the biggest criminals. You read in all of those newspapers about, the black kids are running rampant and wild. Does anyone think about what happened 60, 70 years ago. The white people running rampant and wild, shooting willy-nilly, controlling, abusing, raping, violating, massacring Aboriginal people. Where does that come from? We ourselves need to look into our past and see where it all happened so we can heal ourselves and not take responsibility for what was done to us, but heal ourselves and our families and one another. I'm not really sure whether our services are capable of doing that, because in all of the service areas, everybody's feeling that pain and that trauma. We've got to start in truth telling in our communities with one another.
Yeah.
And we've got to do it with love and with healing and hope and open heart.
Mm. Well,
because it's us.
Yeah, yeah. And I love what you're saying. I think that truth telling in our own community needs to start. And because there are a lot of people hurting, and it's not in one part of the country, it is located in various locations in every part of our community in this country. So I really thank you for your words, for your insight, for your truth telling. I think it's really important to be talking about this. So Jo, if there are no last words that you'd like to say, I just want to say thank you so much for what you've said here today.
And all I want to close off with, until we have absolute political, economic and social control over our lives, we will have no control over our future aspirations.
Mm-hmm. Perfectly said. Thank you.